How's it going, everybody, and welcome to episode 308 of Master My Garden podcast. Now, this is the last episode of 2025, or the last sort of regular episode of 2025. And yeah, it's one, where I look back on the year, both the growing year, the gardening year, and I suppose the podcast itself. And it's always interesting to look back and I suppose take stock of the year in general. So that's what the theme is going to be for this week. The podcast then will take a little break, as I always do, and regular episodes back on Friday, the 9th of January. So yeah, a week or two there with no actual gardening episodes per se. But nonetheless, it's been a great year, gardening year, I guess. Um, but like every gardening year, it has come with challenges, and every year is different to the other. And the biggest factor affecting any of us, wherever we're listening to the podcast, is weather. And yeah, I know we kind of are a little bit obsessed about talking about the weather here in Ireland, but that's because our weather is just so changeable here. And it varies, and month to month, year to year, quarter to quarter, it varies. Even day to day here at times it can be so different. And yeah, to sort of look back on this year, well, it has been a year that'll be remembered for storms overall. And whenever they do the recap of the year, storms will feature in the main stories of the year. We started off the year with Storm Owen back in January, and that was, I believe, one of the strongest storms that have been recorded in Ireland. And certain parts of the country got devastated with it in terms of trees falling, trees getting knocked down, uh, power outages and damage, and especially then on top of that, damage in gardens, polytunnels, greenhouses, all of that. So that was kind of that set the tone for the start of the year. And here where I am, luckily enough, we did have some sort of damage, and it was, bad enough, but not the worst I've ever seen. And then I remember a couple of weeks later, I had to travel west for some work, and at that point, it became very evident how bad it was in certain parts of the country, and that sparked, among as I say, power outages over a long period of time, and that sparked, I guess, a campaign by the likes of the people who look after the electrical supply to go across the country and how will we put this? Um, Remove trees that they felt were, potentially going to cause issues down the line. They definitely went over the top with that as time went on. That storm seemed to give them all a fright, and trees across the country got hacked um, off the back of that, stating that they were potentially dangerous or going to cause an issue, to power lines. And I can understand it, but it was definitely, in my opinion, across the country, somewhat knee-jerk, somewhat over the top. And at one stage a crew came to my garden to because there's a transformer which is actually in the garden. It's supposed to be out. It was supposed to be outside, and it ended up being inside. There's Betula jacquemonti planted very close to it. They're at full size and are still within several meters of even touching the transformer. They're not a heavy tree, they're not a bulky tree, and they will never, if they were let to grow for eternity, they would never cause damage to that transformer. And a crew arrived in one day and insisted on cutting down one of them. Obviously, I didn't allow that to happen. The guy told me he was a trained, trained arborist, knew everything about trees. He said that the trees were going to grow way bigger and knock over and in time could knock over the transformer. Never going to happen. The tree is full size. So anyway, we compromised, or he compromised, and there was a little bit taken off with a little bit of a trim. But that same thing happened across the country where trees were just hacked left, right, and centre in the name of protecting the electrical supply across the country. That was the start of the year. Sorry, rabbiting on there a little bit, but that was the start of the year, and I thought it was a little bit sad afterwards that so many trees got, as I say, hacked down in the name of protecting the power lines and so on. And I do understand that's, if you're out of power for any period of time, how, especially in modern day life, how, you know, I suppose debilitating that can be for families, especially anyone that's, children, older people, all of those things, and a lot of heating supplies now. So I understand the inconvenience now in the modern world of not having power. But I do think that that response afterwards to that storm was a little bit rash. Yeah, Storm Owen then, as I say, set the tone for the start of the year with doing really bad damage in certain parts of the country. And storms over the whole year have been quite prevalent. We moved Storm Owen, Storm Dara. There was other names in between, and I think we finished recently with Storm Bram, I believe was the name of it. And they hit different areas in different ways with varying degrees of damage and so on. And that was off the back of um, coming into this year, the back end of 2024 was there was storms, sort of featuring. And I guess what is obvious is that, they name all the storms now, and there seems to be storms way more often. Some of them are what we would know as a blow or a little bit of a wind from years ago, but then there's no doubt that there is some damage in actual storms, and probably more and more often than there previously was. So that was the feature of the year, storms. But then that was Storm On kicked off the year in January. But then after that, we had what you could only describe as an almost perfect spring growing season. So everything happened as you would like it to happen. There was very, very little by way of late frosts. There was, little bits, but very little by way of late frosts. We got warm weather and dry weather in the springtime, so crops could get into the ground. We could all get out and do our gardening, and everything grew really well. We did, of course, have that dry period where, we get the perfect spring, and then it extends on a little bit and things get dry quite quickly. And that again is a feature of the last number of years where we're getting this period of dry. And yeah, our spring was fantastic weather-wise. And I'm conscious for anyone listening outside of Ireland that it may not have been like this for you, but just as you'll see in a minute, because we're based in Ireland here, the majority of the listeners are still in Ireland. I'm kind of focusing on that a little bit. Um, but be sure to let me know how your gardening year was. So anyway, we moved from a near perfect spring with lovely sunshine into our summer months, and they were reasonable in terms of growing. It was as I say, a great year for growing, but the summer wasn't as perfect as you would like. There was reasonable levels of sunlight, but not a huge amount of sunny days. We did have some and periods of it, but we also did get, kind of wet days, overcast days, and so on through the summer months. But they were still okay, and as I say, still it was a very good growing year. All those months were still quite good from a growing perspective. We got adequate rainfall, reasonable days, and so on. So we entered into September then and the autumn of the year, and it's a kind of an exciting time in terms of bulbs and all that. And we got off to a great start in September with a couple of good weeks. And being honest, since then it has been extremely wet. As I'm recording here now, it's absolutely lashing rain. We're Probably, I think they said, I must confirm that, but as far as I remember hearing something about it being the wettest November on record here, and it certainly feels like that. There has been so many days of kind of torrential rain where it's, really, really heavy over a long period of time. And then, which you can get at any stage here in Ireland. We're not immune to it. We're well used to it, and it doesn't sort of bother us too much. But when you get these really heavy deluges of rain, we like to get a few days of, bit of a break from it. But there seems to have been more really wet days on top of really wet days over a sustained period, right from sort of sometime in late September into October. And as I say, certainly November has been really poor and the wettest on record. Temperatures are still extremely mild. Like we're almost up to Christmas here, and we've had maybe one or two frosts, but not a sustained period of cold. So temperatures have remained unseasonably warm here. Um, and that definitely is a feature of the last few years, less kind of cold snaps and more warmer, wetter weather. But all in all, looking back on it from a growing perspective, it was a fabulously good year for growing. Generally, everything went well, and from a growing perspective, it was really good. From the podcast perspective, then just to kind of, I like to, as I say, look at some of these um, stats and pieces of information that around the podcast and so on. And yeah, it's interesting. Glasses on for this because I have to do a little bit of reading. But at the moment, 68% of the listeners are in Ireland, so it is predominantly an Irish show. But we have huge amount of listeners in the US and in the UK, and they kind of switch from second place to third place quite regularly. But for the last good while, the US, the United States, have been running quite a bit ahead of the UK. So I have a lot of listeners in the US, and quite a few in the UK, but some other countries and places to mention. Canada this year, a lot of listeners in Canada. Australia has grown quite a lot. Germany, France, Spain, Norway. I wonder at times, like some of the stuff I'm talking about is, universal, but a lot of it is related to, Ireland and, equivalent growing zones, as a lot of you guys would know it. But it is amazing to see listeners from Slovenia, Holland, Italy, Thailand, Croatia, United Arab Emirates. Wow. Philippines, Austria, Taiwan, Ukraine, Bulgaria, China, Russia. If you're listening for any of these places, please do send me a message and tell me. Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Latvia, Andorra, Vietnam, Bangladesh. So yeah, places all over the world, and I find that really, really intriguing to know who's listening from these places and what it is they like or take from the podcast, I guess, because yeah, I'm living in the Midlands here, flat Irish accent. Some people I think would find it hard to understand me, but yet still there's people listening all over the world. And just to give you an idea or a flavor of these places, more down to the regions. So Leinster is still, big percentage of the listeners. Cork, Limerick, Galway, Killarney, Kilkenny, Carlow, local areas to me. London, a lot of listeners around London. Gorey, Portlaoise, skip down through some of them. Longford, Sligo, Singapore, Castlebar, New York, Los Angeles, Letterkenny and Donegal, Waterford, Carrick-on-Shannon, Melbourne, Drogheda, Dungarvan, Columbus, Ohio, Dallas, Texas, um, Johnson City in Tennessee, Duncan in British Columbia, Hertfordshire, Mullingar, Austin, Texas, San Antonio, Texas. If you're listening in Texas, because there's after been a few Texas addresses there, please just give me a shout. Let me know where you're listening. Um, Amazing to see people from all these places listening in. Denver, Colorado. I won't go down through them all. Like there's hundreds here. Um, Ohio, Utah, Loughrea and Galway, Perth, Western Australia, Brisbane, and Queensland, Chicago, Auckland, Cardiff, Ljubljana, Ljubljana. That's in Slovenia, I think. Um, or is it Croatia? One of those places, anyhow. Um, Malahide, Gort, Pittsburgh, Reading, Selbridge, Maynooth, Munich. Uh, yeah, amazing to see all these different places. Some interesting stats on how people listen. So this switches all the time as well when you're kind of keeping an eye on it. 36% of people are listening on Apple, so Apple Podcasts, 32% on Spotify, and that switches. So occasionally you'll see Spotify ahead of Apple, and they switch from one to two. But that's 68% of the listenership is either on Apple and Spotify, and then the rest are on other podcast apps, that people would have. And then there's a percentage of people that are listening on, smart TVs, which again I find unusual, but people are listening on smart TVs, their desktops, and so on. So yeah, it's interesting to see, where and how people are listening. Mobile is still by far the biggest percentage. So people are either listening while driving to work. Listeners have commented that they listen when they're driving to work. So driving to work or out in the garden, that seems to be a common theme. So 91% of people are listening in a mobile format. So we're out and about their mobile and so on. So yeah, it's been from that point of view. We covered the top 10 episodes last week. The podcast continues to grow, continues to reach new people in new places, as you can see from that list. Yeah, fascinates me that people are listening from all these places. Wherever you're listening from, if you would, please just send me a message somewhere that, tell me what it is you're getting from the podcast. Um, as I say, some of these places fascinate me that, somebody is listening from wherever they are, and getting something of benefit from the podcast. So, yeah, so that's been really brilliant. Um, yeah, top episodes, as I say, I covered last week. Next year, I don't have any specific plans um yet for the podcast in terms of if there's going to be any changes or if anything is going to be different or new. I do think that I need to kind of, or that I want to kind of create maybe a different type of an episode as well. So a new angle on an episode. So if you've anything there, like covering the listeners' questions, that's quite a good one. And I always feel that when I answer those questions, that it's helping not just the person that asked the question, but others as well. And so, yeah, I'll continue to do that. The monthly sewing guides are massively popular. They're kind of a repeat of the previous year, but they do keep people, if you're listening, to kind of get you to focus in on that month and really, yeah, get you to hone in on what you can sew in the month ahead. Um, and they also tend to be, from an Irish perspective, they tend to relate quite closely to what's happening here at the time weather-wise, and I think people like that as well. They like the fact that it's kind of up to date with what's happening weather-wise. I do, from my own perspective, need to plan out episodes further in advance to ensure that I'm not putting myself under pressure getting near to sort of release dates and so on. Need to plan out and schedule stuff a little bit earlier. That's hard to do with the with the ones that need to be more up to date in terms of sewing guides and so on. Um, but yeah, from my own perspective, that's something I need to do, and possibly looking at, some different types of episodes, whatever that may be. So if you have any ideas on that, again, shoot them across to me. Um, yeah, so that's kind of the year in review. Brilliant, brilliant year in terms of growing, as I said. From my own perspective, probably over the last couple of years, for various reasons, busy family, um, life going on, football, as I've mentioned before, takes up, Gaelic football takes up a lot of time here, and there's probably parts of the garden that have been neglected. Not probably, there is parts of the garden that have been neglected. Um, Next year, as I say, I plan to do workshops. They're going to hone me or sort of focus me in on getting back in and getting the garden back into shape, um, because it needs to, I suppose, but also because, when you're bringing people to look at, certain things, then it's good that they have gardens that are, I suppose, being looked after the way that they should. And it's not something that bothers me overly, but there has been, because I haven't had enough time, I'm really honing in on what's important, which is for me the most important part is having regular supply of our own food to the kitchen. And that's, as I say, the most important thing and has been the biggest focus over the last few years. But I want to kind of expand out that a little bit and, spend a little bit more time in other areas of the garden as well. I'm saying that, but all the other commitments are still there. So I just have to be careful not to overstretch myself. The lighted den, the workshops, as you know, I mentioned that in the last episode, they're back, and I really like getting back to those in person, that teaching, showing, demonstrating. I love that part of it. So yeah, that's going to become more of a feature, as I said in the last episode, over 2026. And other than that, yeah, let's see what comes. It's been a fantastic year. Um, Really, really enjoyable year in terms of growing. Lots of really good crops, lots of really good flowers. Everything grew perfectly. It was a perfect growing season right up until, the last quarter, which has been horrendously wet. But it's always the case. You'll never see a year where everything just kind of is perfect for every month. That's just the nature of growing. That's just the nature of weather. And, you know, every year there's something to learn, something to take from it. So, but yeah, overall, for the podcast and for the garden and for growing and for you guys, I know a lot of you had huge success in your garden this year. And yeah, here's to next year being the same. We'll have just a happy Christmas episode in the coming days, but until this is the kind of the last, as I say, proper episode of 2025, the podcast will take a break then and be back with full episodes on the 9th of January. So that's been this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and until the next time, happy gardening.